Sophie's whispered warning at her 9th birthday party changed everything. "Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take away your fortune." When they finally realized what I'd done instead, my daughter-in-law's mouth fell open, and my son could barely swallow. Before we continue, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The phone rang at 7:30. I picked it up on the 3rd ring. Michael's voice came through the receiver, but he spoke slower than usual. He paused for 5 seconds before speaking again. I counted the seconds on Martha's wooden clock while I waited. Since Martha's funeral 6 months ago, Michael had called me exactly twice. Both times he asked about insurance papers and bank account numbers. Today he cleared his throat twice before saying anything. The kitchen felt cold around me as I gripped the black plastic phone with both hands. Martha's empty coffee cup still sat on the counter where I'd left it yesterday, unwashed. "Dad, come early to Sophie's party today," Michael said. I heard Emily's voice in the background saying something about cleaning. "We need to go over some family arrangements," he said. The words family arrangements had never come out of Michael's mouth before. Not once in 34 years. I counted backward in my head to Martha's funeral. 6 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. Michael had visited me twice since then. Both visits lasted exactly 45 minutes. Both times he brought a manila folder with papers inside. I set my coffee cup down on the wooden table and watched the steam rise from the black liquid inside. "I'll be there by noon," I said. After I hung up, I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at my workshop in the backyard. The building sat exactly where I'd built it 23 years ago, when Michael graduated high school. The red paint on the door had started to peel last summer. I'd built that workshop with my own hands, mixing concrete for the foundation, cutting every board myself. Now dust covered the workbench inside, and spider webs hung in the corners where my tools used to shine. I opened the wooden box on my kitchen counter and counted the papers inside. House deed, Martha's will, savings account statements, insurance policies, 47 pieces of paper total. Everything in its proper place. I drove the same route to Michael's house that I'd taken for 9 years, ever since Sophie was born. The radio played country music while I passed houses where I'd built porches and fixed roofs. Mrs. Henderson's blue house on Maple Street still had the front steps I'd installed in 2019. The Johnsons' white fence on Oak Avenue stood straight and solid, every post level. I'd measured each one twice before setting it in concrete. Michael's neighborhood appeared after the 3rd traffic light, where newer houses sat on smaller lots. His driveway had fresh blacktop that reflected the morning sun. The mailbox read Walker Family in gold letters that hadn't been there last month. Pink balloons bobbed from metal stakes driven into the front lawn. A cardboard sign taped to the front door said, "Happy 9th birthday, Sophie," in red crayon letters. I counted 12 cars parked along the street, more than usual for Sophie's parties. Emily opened the front door before I reached the steps. She wore a navy blue dress I'd never seen before, and gold earrings that caught the sunlight. Her hair was styled differently than last month, pulled back tight with what looked like expensive clips. She hugged me for 8 seconds, longer than any hug she'd given me in 2 years. Her perfume smelled like flowers I couldn't identify, something that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Henry, you look so good today," Emily said. Her eyes moved from my face to the manila envelope under my arm, then to my truck in the driveway. She looked at the envelope 3 times in 30 seconds. Michael appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. His handshake lasted 4 seconds, and his palm felt damp against mine. He wore a white button-down shirt with creases sharp enough to cut paper. His shoes were black leather, polished to a mirror shine. I'd never seen him dress this formally for one of Sophie's birthday parties. His jaw muscles twitched when he smiled, the same way they used to when he was 12 years old and lying about broken windows. "Come in, Dad. Sophie's been asking about you all morning," Michael said. I followed them through the front hallway into the living room. The furniture had been rearranged since my last visit. The couch sat against the far wall instead of by the window. New throw pillows covered the chairs, all matching in colors I couldn't name. The coffee table had been moved to the center of the room, and fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase I'd never seen before. Emily walked ahead of us, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with precise, measured steps. She checked her watch twice in the span of 20 seconds. The house smelled like vanilla candles, and something else I couldn't identify. Something artificial and sweet. The backyard was full of children running between tables decorated with pink tablecloths and silver balloons. Adults stood in small groups, holding paper cups, and talking in voices that mixed together like background music. Sophie ran straight to me the moment she saw me through the sliding glass door. Her arms wrapped around my waist, and her face pressed against my shirt. She wore a pink dress with white ribbons tied in bows at the shoulders. Her hair had been braided with small flowers woven through the strands. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo Martha used to buy for her. Her hug lasted 15 seconds, and I counted every one of them because this was the first genuine smile I'd felt in 6 months. "Grandpa, you came. Did you bring me something?" Sophie said. I handed her the manila envelope containing a birthday card and a small wooden jewelry box I'd made in my workshop. She tore open the envelope immediately and pulled out the card, reading it twice before opening the small wooden box. Her eyes grew wide when she saw the tiny compartments inside, each one carved by hand and sanded smooth. She ran her fingers over the wood grain and traced the letters SW I'd carved into the lid. Her smile reached all the way to her eyes, the kind of expression that reminded me why I'd learned carpentry in the first place. To build things that would last. Things that would make people happy long after I was gone. "I love it, Grandpa. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Sophie said. She hugged the box against her chest and spun in a circle, her dress flaring out around her legs. Other children gathered around to see what she'd received, their voices rising in excitement over the tiny drawers and hidden compartments. I watched Michael and Emily standing near the patio door, their heads bent together in conversation. Emily pointed toward me twice during their discussion. Michael nodded and checked his watch. They separated when other guests approached them, Emily moving toward the food table and Michael walking in my direction. His smile looked practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. "Dad, that's beautiful work. You've still got those steady hands," Michael said. He clapped me on the shoulder and squeezed, his grip firmer than necessary. "Sophie, why don't you go show your friends your new jewelry box? Grandpa and I need to talk for a minute." Sophie looked up at both of us, her expression shifting from joy to confusion. She hugged the wooden box tighter and took 3 steps backward toward her friends. Her eyes stayed on my face as she walked away. And I saw something there that reminded me of Martha when she was worried about something but trying not to show it. The same slight crease between her eyebrows, the same way of biting her lower lip. I watched Sophie rejoin her friends near the swing set while Michael guided me toward 2 empty chairs at the edge of the patio. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, but the shade under the umbrella felt cool and protected. Michael sat down first and gestured for me to take the chair across from him. His movements were precise and calculated, like a salesman preparing to make his pitch. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped together. His wedding ring caught the light, filtering through the umbrella fabric. Behind him, I could see Emily moving between guest groups, refilling drinks and clearing empty plates. She looked in our direction every 30 seconds. "Dad, Emily and I have been talking," Michael said, "about your situation. Living alone in that big house, managing all those finances by yourself. It's a lot for someone your age." He spoke each word clearly, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. His eyes stayed locked on mine without blinking. I counted 10 seconds of silence before he continued. "We think it might be time to make some changes. Practical changes that would make life easier for everyone." His hands remained clasped together throughout his speech, knuckles white with pressure. A drop of sweat appeared on his forehead, despite the cool shade under the umbrella. "What kind of changes?" I said. Michael glanced toward the house where Emily was watching us through the sliding glass door. She gave him a small nod before turning back to the other guests. Michael cleared his throat and shifted in his chair. His foot tapped against the concrete patio 3 times in rapid succession. The sound reminded me of woodpeckers I used to hear in the trees behind my workshop. Small, persistent, determined to break through whatever stood in their way. The comparison made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I placed both hands flat on my knees and waited for him to answer my question. "We'll talk about it later tonight, after the party," Michael said. "When we have more privacy. More time to go through everything properly." The word everything hung in the air between us like sawdust after cutting through old wood. Heavy and settling on surfaces where it didn't belong. I nodded once and stood up from my chair. Michael's eyes followed my movement, and I saw his shoulders relax slightly when I didn't press him for more details. The conversation felt unfinished, like a house built without proper foundation work. Something that would collapse under pressure if you tested it too hard. The party continued around us with children playing games and adults talking about work and weather and weekend plans. I helped Sophie blow out 9 candles on her chocolate birthday cake and watched her open presents from her school friends. Books and toys and art supplies piled up on the gift table while she hugged each giver and said thank you in the polite voice Emily had taught her. But even during the happy moments, I caught Michael and Emily exchanging glances across the yard. Short looks that lasted 2 or 3 seconds before they turned their attention back to their hosting duties. The kind of communication that happens between people who've rehearsed a plan together. As the sun began to set, and guests started collecting their children and saying goodbyes, Sophie found her way back to my side. She'd been running around all afternoon, and now grass stains covered the knees of her pink dress. Her braided hair had come loose in several places, with flower petals scattered on the ground behind her. She walked slower than she had earlier, and her voice was quieter when she spoke to the other children. I knelt down to her level when she approached me, bringing my eyes even with hers. She looked toward the house where her parents were cleaning up, then back at my face. "Grandpa, can we talk somewhere private?" Sophie said. Her small hand took mine and pulled me toward the corner of the yard where Michael's tool shed blocked us from view of the house. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves of an old oak tree, creating patterns of light and shadow on the grass beneath our feet. Sophie looked over her shoulder twice to make sure we were alone before speaking again. Her grip on my hand was stronger than I expected from someone so small. When she looked up at me, her eyes held an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Serious and worried, and much older than 9 years should allow. "Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take away your fortune. I heard them talking in the kitchen this morning when they thought I was still asleep," Sophie said. The words hit my chest like hammer blows against a steel nail. I kept my face still and patted her back with gentle strokes. My free hand trembled against the plastic cup of lemonade someone had given me earlier. The ice cubes clinked together inside the cup, making small sounds that seemed too loud in the quiet corner of the yard. Sophie's eyes searched my face for a reaction, but I forced my expression to remain calm and steady. Inside my chest, my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "Are you sure that's what you heard?" I said. Sophie nodded 3 times, her braids bouncing against her shoulders. She bit her lower lip the same way Martha used to when she was nervous about delivering bad news. The similarity made my throat close up tight. I swallowed twice before speaking again. "What exactly did they say?" Sophie looked toward the house once more, then stepped closer to me until her voice was barely a whisper. Her words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them inside all day, and finally found someone safe enough to tell. "Mommy said tonight is the perfect time, because all the guests will be gone, and you'll be tired from the party. Daddy said they have all the papers ready, and you just need to sign them. Then Mommy said something about power of attorney and how the house will be theirs if anything happens to you," Sophie said. Each word felt like ice water flowing through my veins. I nodded slowly and smiled at her, even though my face felt like it might crack from the effort. My hand shook as I reached out to touch her cheek. She leaned into my palm, trusting me to make everything okay the way grandfathers are supposed to do. But I had no idea what I was going to do about the trap my own son had set for me. But what I didn't know then was that Michael and Emily had prepared more than just papers for tonight's conversation. After Sophie's warning, I walked back toward the house. 17 guests were saying goodbye at the front door. Emily hugged each person twice and thanked them in the same tone. Michael shook hands with the men and kissed women on both cheeks. His smile never changed. I stood near the patio door and watched Emily's eyes sweep across the backyard. She looked at the swing set, tool shed, oak tree, and flower beds. Her expression reminded me of property assessors who came after Martha died. Sophie squeezed my hand once more before running to collect paper plates from tables. Emily walked over carrying a black garbage bag and dirty plates. She wore the same navy dress, but now food stains marked the front. "Henry, would you mind helping Michael carry tables inside? We'll be eating dinner soon," Emily said. I nodded and walked toward Michael, who was folding a card table. His white shirt had wrinkled, and sweat stains marked the fabric under his arms. He looked up and smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. His jaw muscles twitched twice. I took one end of the table and lifted when he counted to 3. The table weighed about 40 pounds. Michael's hands shook as he guided his end through the sliding door. We set it down in the dining room next to 2 others. Emily appeared with party supplies and gestured toward the kitchen. Michael followed immediately. I heard them talking in low voices through the doorway. Emily's voice came in short sentences, while Michael responded with longer phrases. I heard my name 3 times in 2 minutes. The word "tonight" appeared 6 times. Emily said something about papers being ready. Michael said something about timing. Sophie walked through the front door carrying her wooden jewelry box. She looked toward the kitchen, then at me, then back again. Her expression reminded me of a deer in my backyard, alert and ready to run. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel. She wiped her palms 3 times while looking at us. Michael stepped behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "Of course Dad's staying for dinner," Michael said. "We ordered Chinese food from Main Street. Sweet and sour pork, fried rice, egg rolls, all your favorites." I couldn't remember telling Michael I liked sweet and sour pork, Martha had ordered it once 5 years ago. Emily nodded and smiled with the same expression she'd used for party guests. Sophie hugged her jewelry box tighter and looked up at me. The Chinese food arrived 30 minutes later in white containers. Michael paid the driver and tipped him $5 from a thick roll of bills. Emily set containers on the kitchen table and pulled out plates for 4 people. She moved like she was following choreographed routine. Michael opened each container and stirred with plastic spoons. "Sophie, wash your hands and sit down," Emily said. Sophie disappeared down the hallway. Emily served food onto each plate. She gave me the largest portion, piling sweet and sour pork and fried rice until my plate could barely hold it. Michael sat across from me, and Emily took the chair to my right. Sophie returned and climbed into the chair to my left, her jewelry box beside her plate. Emily had given Sophie the smallest portions. The inequality struck me as strange, like Emily wanted me well-fed and comfortable before whatever came next. My stomach felt tight and heavy instead of hungry. Michael took a bite of fried rice and chewed slowly. "So, Dad, how are you managing at home?" Michael said. Emily cut her sweet and sour pork into precise squares, each piece exactly the same size. Sophie picked at her egg roll with her fingers, tearing off small pieces. The kitchen felt smaller than I remembered. The overhead light cast sharp shadows across everyone's faces. Michael's question hung in the air for 15 seconds before I answered. Emily glanced at him quickly, then back at her plate. Sophie stopped eating and looked at me with the same worried expression from earlier. Michael's voice was louder than necessary for the small space, like he was making a speech to a room full of people. "I manage fine," I said. Emily nodded along with timing that was too perfect. She knew exactly when to nod and when to look concerned. They'd rehearsed this conversation. Sophie pushed rice around her plate with her fork, making small piles and valleys. She didn't look up at her parents while they spoke. Michael reached across and patted my hand. His skin felt warm and damp. He left his hand there for 5 seconds. Emily smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. The expression reminded me of customer service representatives following memorized scripts. Michael and Emily exchanged a look that lasted 3 seconds. Emily tilted her head left, and Michael responded with a small nod. "We think it might be time to make some changes," Emily said. "Practical changes that would make life easier for everyone involved." She emphasized everyone, like it was the most important word. Sophie looked up from her plate and watched her parents with the same intensity she used for spelling tests. Emily cleared her throat and leaned forward. Michael pushed his plate away and folded his hands on the table. The words came out carefully measured, like he'd practiced them. Emily reached for a manila folder that had been sitting on the counter behind her chair. She placed it between us and opened it to reveal white papers covered with small black text. "After dinner, we'd like to go over some paperwork," Michael said. "Legal documents that would help us help you manage things more efficiently. Power of attorney forms, updated will documents." The words "power of attorney" made my chest tighten. Sophie stopped moving her fork entirely and stared at her father. Emily touched Sophie's shoulder, but Sophie pulled away slightly. Not enough to be rude, but enough to create distance. Emily spread the papers across the table like a dealer shuffling cards. Each page had colored tabs and yellow sticky notes with arrows pointing to signature lines. Someone had spent considerable time preparing these documents. "These are the documents we mentioned," Emily said. "Power of attorney forms, updated deed transfers, medical directives. Everything you need to ensure your wishes are carried out properly." I picked up the first document titled Durable Power of Attorney Agreement. Section 4 gave the attorney-in-fact complete control over financial decisions without requiring my consent. Section 7 allowed for emergency determination of incapacity based on judgment of 2 family members. I set the paper down and looked at Michael and Emily. They watched my face with careful neutrality. Sophie held her jewelry box in her lap, tracing the carved letters on the lid. "This section about emergency determination," I said. "What exactly does that mean?" Michael pointed to paragraph 7 with his index finger. His fingernail was clean and perfectly trimmed. Emily moved closer to the table and folded her hands. Sophie picked up her jewelry box and held it tight. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, each second marked by tiny mechanical sounds that seemed too loud. Emily's wedding ring caught the overhead light and threw small reflections onto the papers. Michael nodded and smiled like he was offering to help carry groceries. But the papers told a different story, about complete control over everything I owned. "It's just a precautionary measure," Emily said. "In case you become unable to make decisions due to illness or injury. Michael and I would manage your affairs until you recovered." She spoke like she was explaining simple insurance instead of documents that would give them power to sell my house, access my bank accounts, and make medical decisions based on nothing more than their determination that I was incapable. I picked up the second paper and scanned the deed transfer text. The document would transfer my house to Michael and Emily immediately upon my death, but also included clauses for taking possession if I was declared mentally incompetent by a doctor of their choosing. "The deed transfer ensures your house stays in the family," Michael said. "No probate delays, no legal complications. Everything transfers smoothly exactly the way you want it." But the document didn't specify the house would eventually go to Sophie. It gave Michael and Emily complete ownership with no requirements to pass anything to their daughter. I rolled the pen between my fingers and looked at them across the table. They sat perfectly still, waiting like vultures on a telephone wire. Sophie clutched her jewelry box and watched my face. The papers represented systematic transfer of everything I'd worked for during 71 years. My house, savings, independence, dignity. All would belong to Michael and Emily the moment I signed. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "with witnesses. That's how builders like me make sure the foundation holds." Emily's face darkened for 2 seconds before she forced her smile back. Michael's jaw muscles twitched 3 times rapidly. Sophie looked at me with what might have been relief. Emily gathered papers back into their folder with movements too quick and sharp. Michael pushed back from the table and stood without speaking. He walked to the kitchen sink and turned on water, letting it run while staring out the window. The sound filled the silence that had settled over the dinner table. "Of course," Emily said. "Legal documents should always be handled with proper care." But her voice had changed from warm and persuasive to cold and professional, like a salesperson who'd lost a guaranteed commission. Sophie opened her jewelry box and showed me the tiny compartments inside. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. Emily and Michael cleaned dishes with quick movements that suggested they wanted this evening to end. But I had no idea that my refusal to sign tonight had just triggered a much more dangerous plan they'd been holding in reserve. I drove home from Michael's house at 8:30 that night. The kitchen felt different when I walked through the back door. Everything was exactly where I'd left it that morning, but the air seemed heavier somehow. I turned on every light in the house and walked to the wooden box I kept on top of my bedroom dresser. The box had been Martha's jewelry case before I started using it for important papers. Inside were documents I'd saved for 43 years, insurance policies, tax returns, medical records, and one leather-bound ledger I'd started keeping when Michael turned 18. I carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it under the bright overhead light. The ledger contained 74 entries in my own handwriting. Each entry recorded a time I'd helped Michael with money or work or problems he couldn't solve himself. Car repairs when he was 22 and couldn't afford a mechanic. Tuition payments when he dropped out of college the first time and wanted to try again. Down payment assistance when he bought his first house. Co-signing loans when his credit wasn't good enough. Emergency room bills when Sophie was born, and his insurance didn't cover everything. 74 times over 16 years. I'd written down dates, amounts, and reasons for each transaction. The total came to $43,867, not including interest or the value of my labor on weekend projects. I opened the ledger to the most recent entry from 3 months ago. Michael had called asking for help with property taxes on his house. The bill was $2,400, and he said Emily's medical practice wasn't bringing in enough income yet. I'd driven to the county office that same day and paid with a check from my savings account. Michael had promised to pay me back within 6 months. That was entry number 74. I turned the pages and read through earlier entries, remembering each crisis and each promise to repay me that never materialized. The ledger told a story that contradicted everything Michael and Emily had said about my inability to manage financial affairs. I picked up the phone and dialed Sam Morrison's number. Sam had been my friend for 38 years and my lawyer for the last 15. He'd handled Martha's will and helped me understand the insurance paperwork after she died. The phone rang 4 times before Sam's voice came through the receiver. He sounded like he'd been asleep, but when I explained what happened at dinner, his voice became sharp and alert. I read him the exact language from the power of attorney documents while he took notes on his end of the line. Sam asked me to repeat the section about emergency determination twice. "Henry, those documents are designed to strip away all your legal rights," Sam said. "Once you sign them, Michael and Emily can declare you incompetent based on nothing more than their own opinion. They wouldn't need a doctor's evaluation or a court hearing." He paused for 10 seconds before continuing. "I can be at your house tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Do you have anyone else who can serve as a witness?" I told him about Linda Peterson, my neighbor who'd worked at First National Bank for 32 years before retiring. Sam knew Linda from church and agreed she would make an excellent witness. I hung up and dialed Linda's number immediately. Linda answered on the second ring and listened while I explained the situation. She agreed to come over at 10 o'clock and bring her daughter, Rebecca, who worked as a notary public at the courthouse. Linda had seen Michael and Emily's behavior at Martha's funeral and told me she'd never trusted Emily's interest in my financial situation. She said Emily had asked her 3 different questions about property values in our neighborhood during the reception after Martha's burial. Linda had found the questions inappropriate and intrusive. I thanked her and hung up the phone. Then I sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, reading through my ledger and preparing for tomorrow's confrontation. The next morning, I arranged 4 chairs around the kitchen table and made a pot of coffee. Sam arrived at 9:50 carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same dark suit he'd worn to Martha's funeral. Linda came through the back door at exactly 10 o'clock with Rebecca following behind her. Rebecca carried a black bag containing her notary supplies and official stamp. I offered everyone coffee and explained what Michael and Emily had planned for me. Sam opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad covered with notes he'd written the night before. Linda took a seat facing the front door where she could see anyone approaching the house. Michael's car pulled into my driveway at 10:15. I watched through the kitchen window as he and Emily got out and walked toward the front door. Michael carried the same manila folder from last night. Emily wore a different dress, this one dark green with gold buttons down the front. They knocked 3 times before I opened the door. Michael's smile looked forced and Emily's eyes moved immediately to the three strangers sitting at my kitchen table. Her expression changed from confident to uncertain in the span of 2 seconds. Michael stepped forward and extended his hand toward Sam, but Sam remained seated and didn't respond to the gesture. "Dad, we weren't expecting other people to be here," Michael said. Emily stayed behind him in the doorway, clutching her purse with both hands. Her eyes moved from Sam to Linda to Rebecca, taking in the notary supplies spread across the table. Michael's smile disappeared completely when he saw the ledger sitting open in front of my chair. I gestured toward the empty chair across from me and invited them to sit down. Emily whispered something in Michael's ear, but he shook his head and walked to the table. Emily followed reluctantly, her heels clicking against the kitchen floor with sharp, nervous sounds. "This is Sam Morrison, my attorney," I said. "Linda Peterson from next door, and her daughter Rebecca, who's a notary public." Sam leaned forward in his chair and looked directly at Michael. His expression was serious and professional, the same look he used in court when cross-examining witnesses. Linda opened a small notebook and clicked her pen twice. Rebecca arranged her notary stamp and ink pad on the table next to the documents Emily had prepared. Michael set the manila folder down, but didn't open it. Emily sat on the edge of her chair like she was planning to leave at any moment. "Michael, explain this clause about emergency determination," Sam said. He pointed to a photocopy of the power of attorney document I'd given him the night before. "According to this language, you get control without his consent, based solely on your own judgment." Michael looked at the document for 5 seconds before answering. Emily fidgeted with her purse strap and brushed her hair back from her face 3 times in rapid succession. Her confident demeanor from last night had completely disappeared. Michael cleared his throat and glanced at Emily before responding. "It's precautionary," Emily said. Sam wrote something in his notebook and looked at her with raised eyebrows. Linda took notes on everything Emily said, writing in the careful handwriting she'd developed during 32 years of banking. Rebecca watched the entire exchange with the neutral expression of someone accustomed to witnessing difficult family situations. Michael opened the manila folder and spread the documents across the table, but his hands shook slightly as he arranged the papers. Emily's breathing had become quick and shallow. "If I'm so incapable of managing my affairs," I said, "explain how I've handled all your bills." I opened the ledger and pushed it toward them across the table. Michael's face went pale when he saw the entries written in my careful handwriting. Emily leaned forward to read the numbers, her eyes growing wider as she scanned down the columns. Entry after entry documenting money I'd given them, work I'd done for them, problems I'd solved when they couldn't handle things themselves. The ledger contradicted every claim they'd made about my mental capacity and financial management skills. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Linda's pen scratching across her notebook pages. Rebecca stamped an official document with her notary seal, the sound sharp and final in the tense air. Michael clenched his briefcase strap until his knuckles turned white. Emily's face flushed red as she realized their carefully planned scheme had been exposed in front of witnesses who would remember every detail. Sam closed his briefcase and stood up from the table. Linda and Rebecca gathered their materials and prepared to leave. Michael and Emily sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the evidence of their deception spread across my kitchen table. But I had no idea that losing this confrontation would drive them to attempt something far more desperate than legal documents. For 3 weeks after the confrontation with witnesses, my phone didn't ring. Michael's car never appeared in my driveway. I drove past Sophie's school twice during pickup time, but I never saw her walking to the bus or playing on the playground. On October 28th, I called Michael's house phone 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. Emily's voice on the recording said they were unavailable and would return calls soon. But my calls were never returned. I drove to their house on Halloween night with a bag of candy for Sophie. The porch lights were off, and no cars sat in the driveway. Neighbors were handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. But Michael's house looked empty and abandoned. On November 2nd, I tried calling again. This time Emily answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was cold and professional, like she was speaking to a stranger who'd called the wrong number. I asked to speak with Sophie, and Emily was quiet for 10 seconds before responding. I could hear Michael's voice in the background saying something I couldn't understand. Emily covered the phone with her hand, and their conversation became muffled sounds. When she returned to the line, her tone had changed from cold to calculated. She spoke slowly and clearly, like she was reading from notes she'd prepared. "Sophie is very busy with school activities right now," Emily said. "Dance lessons, piano practice, extra tutoring sessions. She doesn't have time for visits." I asked when would be a good time to see my granddaughter, and Emily was quiet again. This time the silence lasted 15 seconds. I heard a door close in the background and footsteps on what sounded like hardwood floors. Emily's breathing was the only sound coming through the phone. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and deliberate. Each sentence sounded like it had been rehearsed multiple times. "Henry, we've been thinking about Sophie's future," Emily said. "Private school tuition is expensive. Dance lessons cost money. Piano teachers don't work for free. All these activities require financial commitment from people who care about her development." She paused for 5 seconds between each sentence, letting the implications settle in my mind. I gripped the phone tighter and counted my heartbeats while waiting for her to continue. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking time that felt suspended between Emily's words and whatever ultimatum was coming next. "If you don't sign those documents we discussed, she won't see you," Emily said. "These activities are important for Sophie's education and social development. We can't afford to continue them without proper financial planning." The word "proper" carried weight that felt like a hammer blow to my chest. Emily was using Sophie as leverage, holding my granddaughter's future hostage, until I signed away everything I'd worked for during 71 years. I looked across the kitchen at Martha's empty chair and imagined what she would say about people who used children as bargaining chips in adult conflicts. "That's not care," I said. "That's ransom." Emily was quiet for 3 seconds before the line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry wasp. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at my workshop where dust continued to gather on tools I hadn't used since Martha died. The autumn sky was gray and heavy with clouds that promised rain before nightfall. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table where Martha and I had shared breakfast for 37 years. The house felt empty and quiet, but my mind was racing with plans that would protect Sophie's inheritance from her parents' greed. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office on Main Street. The building was red brick with white columns and marble steps worn smooth by decades of people conducting official business. I climbed the steps slowly, my knees protesting each rise. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of old paper filled the air. A young woman with black hair and gold earrings sat behind a counter covered with rubber stamps and ink pads. I explained what I wanted to do, and she handed me forms printed on legal-sized paper. The paperwork took 45 minutes to complete, with careful handwriting. "Life Estate Deed," I wrote across the top of the first form. The legal language was complex, but the concept was simple. I would retain ownership and control of my house for the rest of my life. Upon my death, ownership would transfer automatically to Sophie Walker, my granddaughter, without going through probate court. Michael and Emily's names appeared nowhere on the documents. Their greedy scheme would gain them nothing but the knowledge that they'd lost their daughter's trust and their father's respect. I signed my name with the same pen I'd used to sign mortgage papers 43 years ago when Martha and I bought our first home. The clerk reviewed my paperwork twice before accepting it for official recording. She stamped each page with a red seal that made the transfer legally binding and permanent. The recording fee was $35, which I paid with cash from my wallet. She handed me certified copies of the recorded deed in a yellow envelope marked Official Documents. I thanked her and walked back to my truck, feeling lighter than I had in months. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and the sky had cleared to reveal patches of blue between white clouds. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past houses where I'd done carpentry work over the years. At home, I made another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the yellow envelope in front of me. The certified deed lay inside, bearing the county's red seal and official signatures. Sophie's name appeared as sole beneficiary in black ink that couldn't be erased or altered. I opened the envelope and read through the document one more time, checking every detail to make sure the legal language matched my intentions. Everything was correct and properly executed. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back in the envelope. Then I smiled and spoke aloud to Martha's empty chair. "Now, let them try," I said. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen like a promise I'd made to my wife's memory and my granddaughter's future. I slipped the envelope into the kitchen drawer where I kept important papers. The red seal caught the overhead light and gleamed like a ruby surrounded by ordinary household documents. Michael and Emily had no idea what I'd done, but they would learn soon enough. I finished my coffee and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Sophie used to chase butterflies during summer visits. The workshop stood solid and unchanged, waiting for the day when I might teach my granddaughter how to build things that would last. But I didn't know that Michael and Emily were already planning their final, desperate attempt to take everything away from both Sophie and me. On November 15th, Michael's car pulled into my driveway at 3 in the afternoon. I watched through the kitchen window as he and Emily got out and walked toward my front door. Michael carried the same manila folder he'd brought to both previous meetings. Emily wore a black coat I'd never seen before and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. They knocked 4 times, harder than necessary. I counted to 10 before opening the door. Michael pushed past me into the hallway without being invited inside. Emily followed, removing her sunglasses and scanning the house like she was memorizing details for an insurance appraisal. "We need to talk," Michael said. He walked directly to the kitchen and set his folder on the table. Emily positioned herself between me and the back door, blocking my exit route. Her stance reminded me of security guards I'd seen at banks, alert and ready to intercept anyone trying to leave. Michael opened his folder and spread the same power of attorney documents across the table for the 3rd time. His movements were quick and aggressive, like someone running out of patience with a difficult negotiation. Emily checked her watch twice in the span of 30 seconds. "Either sign today, or we'll make sure Sophie never steps foot here again," Emily said. Her voice cut through the kitchen air like a saw blade through hardwood. Michael nodded and pointed to the signature lines marked with yellow sticky notes. His finger tapped each spot 3 times, making small percussion sounds against the paper. Emily pulled out a pen and set it next to the documents. The pen was expensive-looking, silver with gold trim, the kind used for signing important contracts. Michael leaned forward with his elbows on the table, his eyes locked on my face. They thought they had me cornered with nowhere left to run. I stood up from my chair and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept important papers. Michael and Emily watched my every movement, their breathing synchronized like they'd rehearsed this moment together. I pulled out the yellow envelope containing the recorded life estate deed and carried it back to the table. The envelope felt light in my hands, but the weight of its contents would crush their greedy schemes forever. I dropped it on the table next to Michael's folder. The sound it made was soft but final, like a gavel falling in a courtroom where justice had finally been served. "Open it," I said. Michael reached for the envelope with hands that shook slightly. Emily leaned over his shoulder as he pulled out the certified deed with its red county seal and official signatures. I watched their faces change as they read Sophie's name listed as sole beneficiary. Michael's skin went pale, and Emily's mouth opened without making any sound. The kitchen clock ticked 10 times before either of them spoke. Emily grabbed the document from Michael's hands and read it again, her eyes moving quickly across the legal language that transferred ownership directly to their daughter. "This can't be legal," Emily said. She turned the paper over and examined the back like she was looking for hidden clauses or loopholes. Michael slumped in his chair and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook twice, and when he looked up, his eyes were red around the edges. Emily set the deed down and stared at me with an expression I couldn't identify. Anger mixed with disbelief, mixed with something that might have been respect. She picked up the expensive pen and clicked it 3 times without writing anything. "When did you do this?" Michael said. I walked to the coffee pot and poured myself a fresh cup, taking time to add cream and sugar while they waited for my answer. The normalcy of making coffee felt surreal against the backdrop of their collapsed dreams. Steam rose from my cup in thin spirals that disappeared into the kitchen air. Emily folded her arms across her chest and tapped her foot against the floor. Michael gathered his power of attorney documents and shoved them back into the manila folder. The papers crinkled and tore slightly from his rough handling. "Last week," I said, "while you were teaching Sophie that grandparents are only valuable for their bank accounts." I sat back down at the table and sipped my coffee slowly. The liquid was hot and bitter, but it warmed me from the inside out. Michael and Emily sat frozen in their chairs like people who'd just witnessed a car accident they couldn't prevent. Emily's expensive pen lay forgotten on the table next to the deed that had destroyed their plans. Michael's folder sat closed and useless, containing documents that no longer mattered. I lifted my coffee cup and looked directly at Emily across the table. The overhead light reflected off the red county seal on Sophie's deed, casting small ruby-colored shadows on the kitchen table. Emily's confident demeanor had evaporated completely, replaced by the defeated expression of someone who'd lost a game they thought they'd already won. Michael stared at the table without speaking, his breathing shallow and quick. The silence stretched between us like a bridge that had been burned and could never be rebuilt. "Funny thing is, Emily," I said, "you were right. The house is seamless now. Straight to Sophie. 0 probate." Emily's mouth fell open, and Michael froze completely, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. I sipped my coffee and watched my son swallow hard, his Adam's apple moving up and down like he was trying to digest something bitter. The kitchen felt smaller and quieter than it had in months, like a storm had finally passed and left clean air in its wake. They left without saying goodbye, their expensive schemes reduced to worthless paper and broken dreams. As I watched their car disappear down the street, I realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't what you gain. It's protecting what matters most from those who would take it away. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.